Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the One Soccer YouTube channel. It's Alexander Gongi-Ruzik here today. I'm joined by special guest Ben Steiner of MLS and Northern Football. Ben, how's it going?
Well, you caught me. I was going to go swimming this evening. It's my birthday tomorrow and was going to go for a little swim. But, Canadian soccer can never rest. 4 p.m. on Black Friday. And we hear some pretty significant news in the Canadian soccer world. What a week. Hey, what a time in MLS for coaching this week. Yeah, I mean, just overall, a bit of a crazy week.
Yeah, I mean, we start Monday, wake up, you get some big coaching news. You end Friday, maybe some people out east are heading home for the offices or, getting in the car and you get some news to end the week. I guess that's kind of typical. We always seem the news cycle seems to be at the beginning and end. But for those unfamiliar, if, you missed the news or you're just popping by, we'll start with that. John Herdman, now former head coach of Toronto FC, has resigned. The news was made official about an hour ago. TFC put out the announcement. Herdman put out a statement. So I'll just quickly go through that. He said, personally, I've made the difficult decision that it is the right time for me to step away from the club as the organization defines its vision for the future. It has been an honor to wear the Toronto FC crest and contribute to the growth of the club. Working with this dedicated group of players and staff has been a true privilege. I also want to thank the incredible fans for the support they've shown me both on and off the pitch. I wish the organization a success going forward, and I look forward to the next chapter in my career. So, of course, with John Herdman, it's a lot going on. I mean, you can start with on the field performance. Toronto FC had a good start to the year. Things fizzled out. They finished near the bottom of the table. Then, of course, there's off-field stuff where there's been allegations going out, investigations, a lot of stuff going on. It's one of those where, even had Herdman not resigned, you do wonder if his job would have been at risk over the next few weeks anyways. But certainly, Ben, it feels like the way this played out, it's both surprising and not surprising at the same time.
I think it's a little bit surprising that we do see a resignation from John Herdman. Initially, I thought, maybe these allegations would come to light. FIFA is still investigating, or so I hear, into this situation, that we could potentially have heard something that comes out of the FIFA investigation that would have impacted this. But with Herdman, he steps away. I think in a lot of ways, he's able to kind of look like the good guy coming out of this. And I think that's beneficial for him moving forward in football or in whatever other opportunities. I think he realizes the kind of situation that he was in with all of the allegations and reports going around. So I think he takes a look at that. He took a look at the situation with TFC. It's not like they won the Supporters Shield or the MLS Cup this year. They struggled down the stretch when they probably should have at least made the playoffs going into those final 5 games or so of the season. You look at, their roster construction. So he gets out at a good time for the club. He allows the club to reset, and he steps away voluntarily as well in a way that might be able to, keep him in football in some ways. Because I think when you're looking at a lot of these reports and allegations, you can start to think whether there's the situation that might avoid him being in football long term. But I think today's decision helps him in that. And I think it's commendable for him to step away from the job and not be a distraction for Toronto FC, because if there's one thing that would have been for sure is if we had gone into the new season or even the transfer window with this situation, you're probably still getting those type of questions to John Herdman at every match and before every match. So I think stepping away, good choice for John Herdman, good choice for TFC. Avoids any sort of forced situations, I think, which wouldn't have benefited anybody, and allows the club to move forward at a time when there are some interesting opportunities out there, at least in terms of, coaches that have experience in MLS. I'm sure we'll get into it, but, Jim Curtin is available. Seems like he's Atlanta bound. Vanni Sartini available. And of course, we'll get into the Whitecaps as well. But I do think, overall, a little bit surprising, but probably good for both sides at this point.
Yeah, I think that kind of seems to be the sentiment. I think especially from Toronto FC, because I mean, even if you forget John Herdman's side, his perspective of things, and what he's going through, with the ongoing investigations, and all that's gone on in that front. From Toronto FC's perspective, this offers a fresh start. It's ultimately something, I guess, in their perspective, this was supposed to be the fresh start. John Herdman coming in from the Canadian men's national team, but for multiple different reasons, it hasn't quite worked out. I think that's something where now, whether or not, because heading into next year, maybe, if performance doesn't improve, you're talking maybe in May, June, you're making this decision anyways. Now you have a chance where it's November 29th. It's still early in the off season. You've just started to make your initial roster decisions for what's going to be a big 2025. Of course, we saw Prince Owusu go out the door, so opening up some space at the number 9, and we'll see what other dominoes fall in terms of just the roster composition. But now if you're Toronto FC, you can bring in another head coach and of course, there's the side that there's been a real lack of stability at TFC. Bringing in another head coach doesn't help. But like you mentioned, their hand isn't forced. And sometimes that's always a plus in sports when the situation times out like this, right? It'd be better now than down the road. But yeah, it definitely does feel like for TFC, this isn't the worst timing for all this if you're looking at it from their perspective, is it?
Yeah, I think you can also look at it at this week. We saw Atlanta move on officially from Rob Valentino. We saw St. Louis hire a new coach in Olaf Moldberg, but they moved on from Bradley Carnell. You look at, the Whitecaps move on from Vanni Sartini. New York City moves on from Nick Cushing. And now Toronto FC moves on from John Herdman. They're just in the big group of MLS teams that have now moved on from their coach, performance-wise or allegations-wise. And so they're, right in the mix to either get one of these coaches that has moved on or been fired or parted ways, or they can, look outside of MLS, of course, but they're just part of this big group now. And I think that's an advantage because the season's not over, right? The conference finals are tomorrow night. And so that's a point that TFC wants to be playing at. A former TFC manager is playing at, right? Like Greg Vanny gets to take on the Seattle Sounders again. Tell me if you've heard that story before. But, they're just in this mix. And I think that's an important one to be in this mix, because if you had waited until, say, MLS Cup final, then you're out of this mix and you're playing catch up to all these teams. Whereas, now TFC is on the same footing as all of these other teams that are trying to replace their head coaching roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one clear thing with MLS now. It's becoming a league of churn. I guess perhaps with the salary cap league, it's harder to bring in players. We're seeing managers become more and more expendable, which is, both fascinating and both, dizzying. But it's something where managers or where sporting directors, where clubs are seeing really that you can use this as a high leverage point. But, also from a head coaching perspective, you also have to prove that, for every Peter Vermees situation where he seems to have just lifelong control over SKC, you really have to prove that, okay, I'm going to consistently get results. And really, like, other than a Brian Schmetzer, it's been hard for managers to prove that long term. But, even to return to Herdman itself from this first year, I mean, we kind of I mentioned off the top that, even if you're removing all the outside implications, his year one as a manager was very mixed, right? Like, for a second, all was looking very swimming. Lorenzo Insigne looked great, looked lively, was scoring bangers. Federico Bernardeschi bought in, playing at a good level, ends up making the All-Star team. But ultimately, you look back on the year, there was a lot of worrying red flags, you could almost put them, right? Like the discipline records set a yellow card record in MLS.
Nearly 100.
Yeah, nearly 100. Like, Bernardeschi got like 3 different red cards. Like, there was constant fight to keep 11 players on the field. You look at just the lengthy slumps where when they would lose, it would just pile up. You just look at all those little things that add up. Is this something where for Herdman in year one, how would you have kind of graded it regardless of the whole outcome? Is this something that could have been on the table anyways? Because that's kind of, I think, something that some people are wondering anyway on that part.
I don't think it would have been on the table anyways, because if you look at, where TFC was a couple of years ago, they were in the dumpster results wise. They weren't even contending for a playoff spot in the expanded playoffs, and they showed progress this year. There's only so much you're going to do when you have, one DP that is in most effects not making an impact in the team, and that's being Lorenzo Insigne. And then Federico Bernardeschi, for what he's making, he's a useful player, but he's not the DP level of what you want from a player like that. I think of, the Whitecaps, even what they got down the stretch from Stuart Armstrong wasn't great, but it was okay. And it was similar to what Bernardeschi had done kind of all year. And so when you look at, MLS and the way that teams are structured, if you don't hit on your DPs, you're probably not going to be contending. You can contend for, a playoff spot, but is finishing 8th or 9th really the bar? And TFC contended for a playoff spot. So they did show progress. I don't think this would have been on the table if it weren't for all the reports and allegations going around. But if they had struggled and we get to, June, July, Club World Cup time, Leagues Cup time, then I do think that it would have been, considered. But keep in mind that, MLSE has also undergone a leadership change. Maybe they, changed their outlook on what Herdman and what results mean to the club being TFC. And since 2016, 17, and 19, in the Bezbachenko days, like, this hasn't been a club that has had that level of success. So I think the leash would have been short, but it wouldn't have been after one season. He would have gotten another half season, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting that you mentioned the leadership, though, because it is something where you also do wonder how things look if, say, maybe Bill Manning's still in, right? Because clearly Herdman gets brought in last year, aggressively targeted, and that's Bill Manning's guy, and Bill Manning's no longer here. Of course, I don't think Keith Pelly in normal circumstances maybe would have been fully considering this, but you also do wonder if that maybe gave him a bit of an itchy finger, so to speak, of like, he's come in, he's said a lot of things, he's been very pointed, very targeted with his words, saying like, yeah, we want guys that are here. You just see the comments. He seems to indicate that there could be even some movement on Insigne Bernadeschi with how aggressive Pelly's been. It also does feel like this could be a bit of an era shift that I do wonder if you're Pelly, you're almost like looking for this excuse anyways. Like, that's what I do wonder if the leadership role, because again, with Herdman, like you mentioned, some of this could have been out of the team's control anyways, but I also do wonder if Pelly's aggression since he's come in has also played a big role in that front.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see just how the outlook changes. And I mean, you can look across kind of the MLSE atmosphere as well. Like, the Leafs start making different kinds of decisions with Craig Berube. You have the Argos winning a Grey Cup, but, how much does that necessarily matter? What's their decision going to be in terms of, Chad Kelly or Nick Arbuckle? They have quarterback decisions to make there as well. So I think the overall decision-making process of MLSE is going to be very different in the next few years under Keith Pelly. This is a guy that, has a history of winning, has a history of caring for a lot of these sports across the MLSE portfolio. And then, of course, you have the new ownership with MLSE as well, and Rogers taking a controlling share of that. So I do think that we're going to see a different approach, and I think that that's going to have a lot of emphasis on winning as well. So that's why I do think, it was a short leash for Herdman. This next coach is going to be a guy that, especially with the way the roster is built now, has to figure out how to do something with this roster. That's why, as much as I like Jim Curtin as a coach, I don't actually see him fitting in this situation, because this is a coach that spent over 10 years at the Philadelphia Union and was able to build that club. At this point, you can't build TFC because everything's invested in Insigne. If you can move on from Insigne, it's a different conversation, I think. But that's the big step between, are you hiring a project coach or are you hiring a coach can you somehow turn this team into a winner?
For sure. And I mean, let's kind of go that direction. I'd say the next coach, because I mean, look, there's a lot that can be said about, the whole Herdman situation and everything. Ultimately, it's a very complicated one. But now, like we mentioned, Toronto FC has a chance for a fresh start. And let's just say the last 4 years, it's they've been looking for fresh starts for a while now, right? It's there's the 3 straight bottom 2 finishes. This year things improved slightly when you look at that technically it wasn't bottom 2, so it represents progress. Pardon me, but it's been interesting because now TFC have tried various routes to get out of this, right? They tried a Chris Armas of, someone with a bit of MLS experience, but a bit younger. Didn't work out. Okay, you go the complete opposite and you bring in Bob Bradley, vast experience, been in Europe, been in MLS. Doesn't work out. Now you kind of go John Herdman, you kind of go back in a mix of unproven but proven, right? In the sense that, he's in his 50s. He's someone who's coached extensively at the national team level, but then hadn't coached at all at the club game. And there were concerns of how that would hold. If you're TFC, what's the profile of manager you're looking for? Because it is a unique that this team should be rebuilding. It has been rebuilding, yet because of how aggressive they were in 2022, where they made like 2 to 5 very big swings based like Insigne Bernadeschi for sure. And you could even argue some of the other ones, like even, bringing back a Larea, keeping an Osorio around, right? Like those are all moves.
Sean Johnson is one of the more expensive goalkeepers in MLS as well.
Exactly. You made a huge free agent swing on Sean Johnson. You look across the roster, like this has been a team that's been constantly trying to make the big swings. is that something where you almost double down on it again as a manager? What's the kind of profile you're in? Because you mentioned Curtin not really fitting. Is there another kind of profile of manager you're looking at in this case for TFC?
It's tough. I think a lot of people are not going to like me for saying it, but I think Sartini might be what this team needs. You get a lot of the sort of vibes higher that you got around Herdman, a motivational guy, a guy that can inject a lot of energy into a group. And you also get a guy that now has 3 years of adaptable MLS experience with the Whitecaps, where he's won 3 Canadian championships. He's been able to get that team to the playoffs and help out in terms of their recruitment with Axel Schuster in getting players like Ryan Gauld onto that team, getting players like Andres Cubas onto that team. Those are the signings that are a third of the price of what TFC has spent, and the signings that are making a difference in MLS. So I think for this TFC team, for the next 2 to 3 years, when you're still hamstrung by a lot of those 2022 signings, I actually don't think Sartini is a bad hire. Do they do it? I'd give it a 5% chance, because I just don't think, Sartini would necessarily be interested in the move, and I'm not sure TFC would want to go down that route either. But I do think it makes a little bit of sense. Other than him, I think you give Marco Nepp the keys and you let him make his hire. Whatever random hire it might be, you let him make his hire. He's clearly built a winner or been part of building a winner at Bayern Munich. And you can trust him to appoint a coach that will fit the situation and be able to grow from that situation as well. And I think that's the important thing, is you need a coach to fit the situation, but also to be fine to grow with it. And that's not Curtin. Could be a Sartini. I'm not sure it's a Smyrniotis. And those 3 names, I think, are going to be the kind of names that we hear a lot of over the next little while.
Yeah, I think if Vanni Sartini were to get hired, as the reaction from Jeff and G Money in the comments say, it's he'll definitely have some apologies to do, I guess, for what it's worth. Vanni Sartini is a very good. He knows how to put his words together, so I'm sure he'd write a very heartfelt apology, starting with, sorry that he took his shirt off and barrel rolled around BC Place in 22 and then took his shirt off in 2024. But, personal reasons aside, I think that's definitely the sort of name you'll be looking at. Another name, I threw him out for the Whitecaps, but I mean, you may as well throw it out for TFC. It's the same candidate of people. You do wonder if a Robin Fraser reunion in Toronto could be a name that makes sense, right? Especially because, maybe it's something where, since this club clearly is in an identity crisis, maybe bringing someone who is around in better times when things were going well, but also someone who's experienced, someone who's gone elsewhere. I do wonder if like a Robin Fraser could make sense to reunite. Plus, he's a bit more experienced, right? So it's not like you're bringing in someone completely unproven. I do wonder if that's something that makes sense, right? If in terms of MLS experience hires, him, Curtin, those are kind of guys at the top of my own list, and guys we mentioned when talking about the Whitecaps. Also, I do wonder, this is always a bit of a risk, but given that there's a strong, European influence, say, at the top of the lineup, the fact that the last few managers have all been MLS experience or North American experience, guys like Herdman, that haven't always gotten through to those guys. I do wonder if TFC does maybe take a look outside and go for a European name, especially with, you mentioned Marco Nepp's influence. I feel like that's something that maybe could get lost in all this, is that because we're starting to see it with MLS, that because in the 2000s, we saw a lot of Europeans come through. Like, remember Ruud Gullit at LA Galaxy being an absolute disaster? It's because they came in and they didn't really, the league was very different. You had that back at a time where guys were either making 10K or 25 million, like Beckham, and how that was. But the league's changed. We're seeing a lot more of a European influence. You mentioned St. Louis as well, bringing in, someone with that sort of experience and background. You have to imagine the Whitecaps are looking. Could this maybe open the door for TFC to look at Europe for their next coach?
Well, I know Brendan Dunlop of Canadian Soccer Daily had looked at a pretty significant coach that he thinks could potentially come, and I wouldn't quite agree with him, but Jose Mourinho, is that a call that TFC makes potentially? Like, is that the kind of foreign coach that you're swinging for, considering where Mourinho is in his career? Personally, I don't think so, but that was a name that Brendan threw out there and is certainly intriguing, and I think would intrigue a lot of TFC fans, and definitely, kind of fit the casual fan that TFC has kind of gone for in the past as well. Rob Valentino is another name that would kind of come to mind. He's had interim head coaching experience twice at Atlanta, upset Inter Miami and Messi this year, and could probably be ready for a head coaching role. That's still looking at, the domestic game. But I think looking to Europe, especially if you're looking as a Marco Nepp hire, first hire Marco Nepp full time and then let him, make this hire, because I think I would have a lot of trust in that. I'm not completely adept at the the European coaching market and sort of the maybe second tier of coaches that TFC would be in the market for. But I think that's the kind of hire that you'd want to take, because it's worthwhile taking a bit of a chance on this hire, I think, because if you take a swing, then maybe you get someone kind of affordable and it works out brilliantly. If you take a swing at, a trusted person, then you kind of know what you're getting. And so I think, letting Net make a smart decision, one that, the press release comes out and nobody's necessarily heard of this guy unless you follow things closely. I think that's the kind of vibe that I would go for in terms of a hire for TFC. If you're not going to go down the route of like fresh MLS coach or experienced MLS coach. And, Tata Martino is not going to come to TFC. He's going back to Argentina.
Yeah, well, I think it depends also what TFC wants. I mean, love the edit there in terms of, I mean, if again, yeah, Vanni Sartini was going to join Toronto, this would be, I'm sure, one of many things he would have to do, because he's just was so Vancouver, let's just say, for lack of a better way to put it. He really amplified the city in his time here. But no, in terms of TFC, it also depends on the direction, because I think the way I look at it is, if again, like the Italians, if you really struggle to get out from under those contracts, if you're maybe really seeing this as a chance to still retool, then maybe, some of the more experienced European head coaches makes a lot of sense. I like the shout there from Urias that we brought up there. Sergio Conceição, he was there at Porto for a while, did some good things with them, won a bunch of trophies. You mentioned Mourinho, maybe that's too big of a swing, but that's the kind of name they were looking at. You look at some of the other names, you wonder if, like a Steve Cooper recently fired at a Leicester, you wonder, maybe could a TFC even swing at like a Graham Potter? I doubt it, just because I feel like Graham Potter is waiting for something big in Europe. It is strange that he's without a job. Another name that I'd throw out, maybe again, if the Italians are sticking around, like Daniel De Rossi, right? I'm pretty sure there's some crossover with an Insigne and a Bernardeschi. De Rossi's still young. At Roma, they've just been a rotating circus of managers. They've had like 4 in the last year, and then De Rossi feels like he got a bit of the short end of the stick. So maybe if you're keeping an Insigne around, and maybe a De Rossi is a way to bring something familiar. But then also it depends. Like if you are starting a rebuild, I genuinely would say there's no better name to start than Bobby Smyrniotis, just in the sense that, this is a guy that has built a project from the ground up and has turned it into a winner. And I think if you're TFC, the fact that you had Smyrniotis there and you ignored him in the past, maybe this is a chance to kind of atone all that. You cut ties loose with the Italians and let Bobby Smyrniotis come in. That's maybe something to talk about. And actually, to help us talk about it, I'll bring in producer Armin, who had some thoughts and some words to potentially say about Bobby Smyrniotis, because I think that's one where you mentioned it, Ben. There's going to be a lot of chatter, and I do think this time there is genuine validity around it that maybe wasn't there 2-3 years ago when Smyrniotis was in these same discussions. But Armin, I'll throw the floor to you.
Hey guys, first of all, awesome stuff. Thanks for having me on. I wanted to kind of touch base on the Bobby Smyrniotis topic, and mainly because I tweeted it out that I think that this is the time to do it, although not in so many words, but mainly because I think it's like what we've seen so far from Toronto FC, and especially from Keith Pelly, is this call for identity. And if you're talking about identity, not only do you have a guy that is a proven builder of clubs with identity, but he's also a proven builder of clubs with identity in your city or in and around your city. I mean, if you want to talk about like a local soccer guy, this is the guy. There is no one more qualified to build out your local soccer scene than Bobby Smyrniotis. And I think that there are things at Toronto FC that are fundamentally, I think, so big picture that have been ignored for so long that I think this is also an opportunity to bring it all home. One of the biggest things that I hear from the local soccer scene is how disconnected Toronto FC's academy is for parents, for that kind of pathway to their kids. The other part of it is we've seen how much success a Sigma, for example, has in producing pros, but we haven't necessarily seen that translate, especially over the last 5 years at Toronto FC. So I think one of the biggest things that this club can do right now is set it up as this is not just a hiring a head coach. If we're being honest with the state of the roster, it's not going to get fixed in one off season. When you guys were talking about it, Ben, you mentioned Sean Johnson, and obviously the big elephant in the room is Lorenzo Insigne, for how small his stature might be. But I think, like, genuinely, the club needs to be honest with its supporters and say straight up, this is a project now. We're going to take like 2 or 3 years. We're really going to build this out. But fundamentally, the thing that we're going to work on is how does Toronto FC kind of fit into the broader Toronto soccer community? What is the TFC Academy meant to be? And I think that more than just having a head coach, Bobby Smyrniotis can guide all of that. So my proposal, my potential idea, I guess, on this front is you bring in Bobby Smyrniotis, head coach, year one, just to get everything sort of aligned. But then you slowly move him towards being more of a technical director, maybe a with an academy focus, in order for that integration to happen. But more than that, in order to create a cohesive timeline between just for fan expectations, like you can say, all right, look, this is a 3-year project. We're going to take our time. We're going to do this right. We're going to rebuild our roster. And I think Bobby's the right guy to do that. It sets the expectations in the right way. So that would be my argument. That's my pitch for Bobby. I don't know what you guys think. Is it maybe too ambitious? Is it something that they need absolutely right now? I mean, do you even have the luxury of being able to take that risk?
I don't think the club has the luxury of being able to take that risk. And as much as I would love to see the chance finally given to Bobby or Tommy Wheeldon Jr. In terms of, successful CPL coaches, I don't think TFC is the club to make that move because, as you say, the club is, in a lot of ways, you hear from supporters, very disconnected from the Toronto soccer community, that it is an American team for all impacts and purposes. It is basically an American team. And so you look at sort of the situation that TFC is in, they want to be in that realm with the LA Galaxies of the world. Of course, they want to be in the realm with the Seattle Sounders again, who haven't moved on to their coach since the good old days of TFC versus the Sounders. Like, they want to be in that kind of tier of exciting hires. And as much as Smyrniotis might be the right hire in a lot of ways in terms of building out club culture, in terms of, building the academy, so you're not slipping up on guys like Jacob Schaffelberg anymore, I'm not sure he's, exciting enough for Toronto FC. That's a hire that I think the Whitecaps could make, because it does seem sort of within that respect, even though logically from, Smyrniotis' perspective, it would probably fit a lot better in Toronto because he knows the area so well and he knows the community so well and could tie the soccer community to the biggest club in the area. But I think that's more of a Smyrniotis or Wheeldon Jr. to the Whitecaps move in terms of the first CPL to MLS coaching hire rather than a TFC move. The move that I would be intrigued in, and I don't know whether Smyrniotis would do it, I would have to ask him, is assistant coach at TFC. You bring in, a head coach that would be, maybe the more exciting hire, the guy that you want to lead this team into the contention window because you don't want to make 2 hires. But then you bring in Smyrniotis as an assistant coach. You let him make that impact, tie the community to the club, and then move into more of a sporting director role when this club is, trying to win MLS Cups again.
Yeah, I think that my only counter to this point is the best years of Toronto FC's franchise history came when they had a really unassuming president in Tim Bezbatchenko at the time anyways, and an even more unassuming head coach in Greg Vanney. I mean, they went for vanity hires in like Ryan Nelson before that and then afterwards as well, and it's never panned out. And my other argument towards this is, like, I don't think Bobby Smyrniotis fundamentally is a manager who can't manage big players. Like, if the only benefit to hiring a European manager with some big name pedigree is, okay, assuming that they can move on from Insigne and you bring in someone else, that you're looking to have a manager that can unlock the most of your designated player star. But I think that's something Bobby Smyrniotis can do, like, to a T. So my argument for Bobby Smyrniotis is based more on the fact that I think that, like, you have to get your fundamentals correct, and then you can build out from there. And I just don't see, like, how if you bring in a big name European manager, even if you manage to move Insigne on, you're still going to have the same problems. Your core of your team is still not going to be good enough. I mean, putting it out there are guys starting this season at Toronto FC that would have never started for that 2017 team. So that's my barometer for like success here is, can you do something that fundamentally addresses all of the big problems at this club, and not just what do we do with designated player insigne? What do we do with, this big salary that we have?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think what I would say for Bobby Smyrniotis is, like, again, this is all up to Toronto FC, because I think what's been clear is that, the league has kind of maybe passed them by in the sense of how to best build a roster. Because, they nailed it from 2015 to 2017. You bring in your Giovincos, your Altidores, your Vasquezes, your big names at the top end of a roster. You filled out the rest of the roster nicely, right? You bring in Delgado from the frickin' whatever it was called, like the supplementary Chivas USA, like redraft,
Yeah.
and some of these guys they were bringing in. And that worked. But the reality of the league is that it's changing. You see, like the Columbus Crew model. I'll use it because, Tim Pezbachenko is such a good example. Like, you have to really, to be good, you have to hit with your DPs. You get your Cuchos, you get your Rossies, your big, multi-million-dollar players. But then you need, your U22 initiative players to hit. You need to be able to get guys within MLS who are good. You need, guys coming out of your second team like Russell Rowe and Farsi have. You need, guys coming out your academy like Schulte in goal. You really need all these boxes to hit, because it's a salary cap league. Ultimately, it's a league of market inefficiencies. And there was a period there in the 2010s, where Beckham and Keane and then Giovinco and a bunch of these guys kind of set the table that you could kind of like roll over those market inefficiencies if your guys were clearly better than the rest of the league. But like the bottom end of the league is changing. And that's why I think for Bobby Smyrniotis, for me, where I look at TFC, where their biggest shortcomings is, like, they've shown a willingness to spend money and bring big players. I don't think that's going to change with the Bobby Smyrniotis there. I don't think that's going to change no matter who's the manager. Where I think they're really missing like a big market inefficiency is the academy. Like, I think it's wild. Like, I just find it wild that the Canadian men's national team, which is on the cusp of becoming a top 30 program in the world, like half of their team, it feels like, maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but 1/3 of the team comes from Brampton and like all comes from Toronto. Yet none of these guys are coming through Toronto in the local team and helping the team win championships. Like, that's a market that's right there, right? You even see it with the Montreal, where a few years ago, using local talent, they were able to, make a run towards Supporters Shield with guys like Piet. And I know he's not a homegrown technically, but Kone had come through the academy-ish. You look at all these guys they had on that team in 2022. You're seeing it with Columbus. You're seeing it with these, even LAFC. Like, for as much as they do at the top of the roster, they do a good job of filling out the rest of the roster with other guys. I do seriously think for TFC, for the sake of a project, Bobby Smyrniotis coming in and clearing and fixing all that is why I think the hire would make sense. I do agree with Ben in the sense that, yes, it's maybe not going to be the big name hire. There's going to be people questioning his credentials. It's going to be a tough gig for Bobby Smyrniotis, and he'll have to be ready. But I have no doubt that he would be ready. And it's just more of a question: would TFC be willing to make that risk when I think that could pay off?
Well, I do wonder that, if you go for Jim Curtin, is Bobby Smyrniotis your insurance hire? Because if you throw everything you have at Jim Curtin, it seems like he's the better hire of the two. And it seems like he's almost Bobby plus, 11 years of MLS experience as a head coach in a Philadelphia system that found a lot of success. He can build everything that Bobby, that Armin thinks Bobby would be able to build at TFC. But if you can't get him and you still want to go with that route, then Smyrniotis might be your right hire, unless you want to completely change course. Because another coach would probably be completely changing course.
I just don't see why is Bobby's name always the one that's like the next one after? Like, that's it. We were saying the same thing about this pre-Herdman. Like, okay, Bobby after. Like, it's now. Like, he's a proven winner. He's a serial winner. And more than that, I think he's an astute tactician. I think he knows how to get the most out of a locker room. He knows how to do it consistently. I mean, winning championships, even as a one-off, is possible. Winning them this many times in such a short amount of with such a short amount of kind of reset in between is almost unprecedented. Like, who is more successful in Canadian soccer than Bobby Smyrniotis? So, I mean, to me, it's like it's starting to get to the point where it's like it's now or never. Like, either bring him on or we're going to lose him. He's going to go to Europe eventually, or he's going to find his next move eventually. And I mean, coming off the back of, let's say, a CPL finals loss that I think might have signaled maybe the end of this era of Forge FC, let's say, as they're going to look to, improve and transition as well. Like, Bobby's probably looking at his options too. So, I mean, I think it's, as far as stars aligning, this is it. Like, if you're going to do it, now's the time to do it.
Well, to that point too, it's not like with managers, it's like you just have to be willing to take the shot, right? Like you have to be willing to take the opportunity. Because what I would throw out at people is Nancy, right? Nancy, everyone loves Wilfred Nancy. He's gonna go coach in Europe. He's the best coach in MLS, if not, top three. Like this guy got his shot at Montreal because he was an assistant, and Thierry Henry randomly decided to step down before the start of the year he was supposed to coach. We'll give this Nancy guy a job. He's here. He knows the club. Oh, wow. He ends up being an excellent manager. I mean, I guess people who would know Nancy, who had seen him in the club, will have said, we saw this coming. What's nice with the Bobby Smyrniotis, he has 6 years of pedigree, of CV, of experience doing it. Of course, you could argue the levels. Ultimately, it's a salary cap league. I think that can't be forgotten. It's not like Smyrniotis is in a playground where, he's just absolutely, it's like a Celtic situation where he's got clear resource advantages, that the rest of the league can't even come close to. Like, of course, Forge will have their advantages in the CPL. Let's not kid ourselves, right? The fact they have the Sigma pipeline to draw from is a huge plus, and credit to Smyrniotis for using that properly. And, ultimately that's created maybe more of a pull for free agents and other stuff. But he's the one who's sort of been able to prove that and give that. So that's why I'd say for me, where I'm looking at this, it's me not thinking Smyrniotis isn't ready. He's more than ready. It's just, will TFC be willing to take that risk? But that's something where I've seen it mentioned in the comments. Culture is a big question with TFC. And sometimes to fix culture, you're going to have to make some uncomfortable decisions. Maybe you're going to have to take some risks. So that's kind of where I'd feel on that.
Yeah, I don't think you can fix the culture until Insigne is off the roster, or if he's making, league minimum and he wants to stick around to play 3 games a year. And so I don't think, that this is necessarily something that you fix with the coaching hire. And there's been mentions that from the TFC, and MLSE front offices that, they don't see defining club culture through a coaching hire either. So, well, I think you can sort of temporarily fix that. I look at clubs around the world, and a coach leaves and they completely lose their sort. And then you look at some clubs like a Bayern Munich, for example, coaches come out, coaches go in, and the culture around that club stays consistent. And that's what TFC wants to build, is a consistent culture around the club. You can't really start that with the manager. That's more of like an overhaul oversight thing. But you can definitely get a bit of a temporary boost with the manager. And that's something that Smyrniotis could help out on. But I do think that Curtin, remains that top tier, and then you can start looking at the others.
Yeah, that was kind of why I was suggesting it as like a 3-year timeline project, where your goal is to move Bobby from head coach to a position where he has more influence over the entire organization. It's also where we're maybe speaking a little out of turn as far as what his personal ambitions and motivations are. Like, maybe Bobby is looking for an opportunity that shows that he's capable of the next level, so that he personally can go to the level after that. So maybe he's not interested in, running that organization. But from what we've seen in his ability to create Forge FC from the ground up, using Sigma as the roots of it, I think this is a guy who fundamentally is a builder. He likes the idea of building sustainable projects in football. And he's also proven that he can be very successful while doing so. So I don't know. To me, it's like the most no-brainer thing in the world. Like, you look at the guy in your own backyard who's just constantly winning and building and producing young players and giving these guys opportunities. And yeah, maybe a part of me has always also really liked the idea that, like, I like seeing CPL players in MLS, because almost universally you'll see, like, the ones that manage to make it there do impress. I mean, we've had MLS Cup winners in Mo Farsi. We've had Canadian men's national team call-ups in Joel Waterman. So why not a Canadian coach? Why not, see what that level looks like? And also, like, there's a part of me that's, very realistic. Like, if it doesn't work out, then what did you lose? One of Insigne's last contract years? Like, it's now or never for me. That's why I feel like the timing of it is, this is it. Are you going to make it happen? Do you have that ambition? Or are we just going to keep repeating the cycle?
I think one of the other aspects that you have to look at as well is, do you want to capitalize on being a winner in 2026? The World Cup ends in July. Are you competing for an MLS Cup in September? Or like going into the playoffs? And are you competing for an MLS Cup in November? So that's the big question. I think they also have to decide on is if they're going to try and turn this around with or without Insigne on the roster, but kind of with the bulk of this roster as is, then you can, probably go for one of the bigger names and somebody that you can really invest in to try and turn this around really quickly. That could go up in flames. That could go terribly. We've seen that before with many clubs in many sports. But that might be the decision that they make, because if you're contending for an MLS Cup after the 2026 World Cup, then you've got to consider that, at least a financial success, because people will be all hopped up on soccer coming out of 2026 and the World Cup, that they'll want whatever is there. The CPL has to make that count. The broadcasters have to make that count. Anybody involved in soccer in Canada, the US, or Mexico, mainly Canada and the US, have to make that count. And I wonder if TFC is going to do everything they possibly can to put an MLS Cup contender on the field for fall of 2026.
Yeah, I think we have like maybe a few more minutes here. So let's maybe just switch tracks to round out this live stream, and let's talk about what Herdman's next steps are here. So let's just kind of bring it back. Because I think now, if you're John Herdman, what is your next move here? Like, you've stepped down voluntarily, which I think is, a good amount of foreshadowing on more investigation to come. Who knows what, we see from him. I know I was watching the Footy Prime kind of video earlier today. They were toying with the idea that, he'll take his time, maybe go back to England, and then he'll try to rehabilitate as well his reputation and see like if there's an opportunity for him. Because I think the thing that we're coming out of this is like his tenure at Toronto FC has been cut short. Like, whether or not you liked his year one, Herdman was supposed to be the guy leading you through the 2026 World Cup. So now that's been cut short. Toronto FC might have to rebuild, but what about for Herdman himself? Like, do you think he takes like a lower league English job or just maybe sits on the sidelines, waits to see what happens? Do you think a club takes an opportunity with him?
Man, to start off that, I feel like the big thing again for Herdman is just let it all play out. Because now you're in a situation where there's no more club ties, right? You're a free man, so to speak, in the sense that there's no jobs, there's no commitments, there's no ties. Just let it all play out and see. Because I think ultimately a lot of what Herdman wants to do might be dictated what happens to him, right? If in terms of FIFA punishment, in terms of CSA punishment, potentially if there's any, in terms of whatever else might come his way. Because it is ultimately something we have to see the scale of things, right? Because is it going to be something as simple as from what we've seen and what's out there in terms of the reports? The big thing has been drones, right? It's been spying. Because I think if you're comparing and contrasting with a Bev Priestman, for example, there was reports this week that it wasn't just drones. It was culture. It was locker room, right? It was more than that. And that's something where that's going to be harder to come back from, because ultimately, especially now, in the modern era, culture, locker rooms, it's so important, especially just erasing past behaviors. So for this perspective, we'll just have to see how far it goes. Or does it just stop at drones and spying? Because I think if that's the case, then, you let this punishment play out. And I think there'll be people willing he'll be able to get a fresh start. But ultimately, I think with Herdman, I think it's just too early to know what's going to go on, because we just haven't seen enough of how deep this goes, right, man?
Yeah, I think you do have to look at, what those situations are going to be, whether that's the FIFA investigation, further movement on the Canada Soccer investigation, or any further potential legal action around all of the allegations and reports that seem to, at least at this point back to John Herdman. So he can't necessarily go out and get something tomorrow, because I don't know if anyone would want to take that opportunity, considering, on the off chance that it's a FIFA punishment, and say he gets his licenses taken away, just potentially, then, you don't want to be the club that just hired him tomorrow. If I were Herdman, if myself were in this situation, I would go home, decompress, try and distance yourself away from the game for a little while. Let this all, kind of sort yourself out, or let the situation kind of sort itself out. His son Jay is playing with Cavalry, is still in the Whitecap system, has a daughter. Like, there's a lot of things that he can do. Go back to Vancouver and just rest for a little while, and then let this, sort itself out over the investigations, and then sort things out. Do I think he's back in football at some point? Yeah, I do think so. I don't think that his reputation has been completely tarnished by resigning from TFC and all of the reports and allegations that are going around. So I do think that he has a future in the game. I do think that he has a future in the game in Canada, because there's still a lot of people that, will back John Herdman on a lot of things. But it's going to be a little bit of time. And I think that's time that's good to take, both for the Canadian soccer community and honestly, probably for John Herdman. At least I would if I were in that situation.
Yeah, it was definitely quite the run there for John Herdman in terms of just the last decade. So yeah, it's going to be strange not to see him around Canadian football, but it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. But I guess lastly, just thanks to everyone who's taken the time today to hop in and join. It's been great to see all the chat. It's been funny to try to keep up and follow with all of your comments. And yeah, I just say, watch this space in the sense that it's going to be big weeks ahead. The Vancouver Whitecaps, we didn't even talk about in this, section. They, of course, Vanni Sartini is out there looking for a new head coach. They've got a massive 2025 TFC. It really feels like this is a big moment. 4 years of darkness. Is this going to be finally the moment where they get out of it? Definitely feels like a lot still to come on this story. And like we've mentioned throughout the show, it feels like this story isn't over on multiple fronts. But Ben, Armin, thanks for hopping on. And I guess any last words maybe before we call it for the night?
Well, I mean, in the conversation about the Whitecaps, now I'm thinking, like, what if Bobby goes to Toronto? What if Tommy goes to the Whitecaps? And then we get a really interesting Canadian Championship final. But no, I think it's like you guys said, still so many different moving pieces here. It's going to be an interesting offseason, especially if you're a Toronto FC fan, because I think the coaching stuff aside, your biggest concern now is what does this player roster actually look like? And maybe this is a stream for another day, but yeah, I'm going to be watching the way this TFC team rebuilds, and they're going to need to hire a coach quickly because there's a lot of work. There's a lot of positions that need to be addressed. And I mean, whether Insigne goes or not, I think the biggest thing for Toronto FC is you really have to figure out what does that 15-player core look like, and can they compete? If they can, then maybe you have a shot. But yeah, we'll see. No Prince Owusu, so they're going to have to find some goals at least.
Tobias Warshevsky could be a shout in terms of replacing up top, but we don't have to get into a full other CPL topic.
No, we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah. I think it's important that they get a coach in place quickly. Not that it's the key to building a roster, but you do have these different MLS avenues where you have the super draft, the re-entry draft. You could find another kind of like Derek Etienne Jr. potentially for this roster through that kind of situation, and those can be useful players. When you're talking about squad depth, those are players that can elevate your top players because you can give them time off. So that's kind of my thinking is TFC has to make the most of every opportunity, and even these MLS avenues that might not excite the casual fan can be useful in terms of building a winner.
Beauty. Well, on that note, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Lots of good football on, lots of men's club football, some women international games as well. Hopefully you had the chance to check out Canada earlier this afternoon. So take care, everyone. And I'm sure we'll be back again on Monday with more breaking news with how this cycle works. So we'll be ready and loaded again once again. So thanks to Ben and Armin. We'll see you guys very soon.